Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming today. My name is Nicole Cook. I am the Augusta Baker Endowed Chair at the University of South Carolina, and welcome to the Spring 2022 Baker Diversity Lecture Series. So I just have a couple of housekeeping items, and then we will get into our first session of the season. It's very excited today. So we're asking everyone to remain muted, just so we can hear our speakers. And we will have time for Q&A at the end of the session. The session is being recorded and will be put on the Baker Programming website in a couple of days. And this is a good time for me to introduce my doc students and graduate assistants. We have Kiara Vargas, who is providing our tunes, and we have Sierra Harris, who is working our Zoom today. And please feel free to put in questions into the chat box for our speakers, and Kiara and Sierra will be keeping track for us. And so just a couple other things. In case you're new to this series, this is actually our third iteration, our third spring of doing this series. And it is named for the wonderful and legendary Augusta Baker, for whom my position is named. She was a legendary Black children's librarian who worked for 37 years at the New York Public Library. So she was a social justice advocate. She was a master storyteller and just a trailblazer, particularly for Black librarianship. And so with that in mind, the last thing that I would like to mention is that we are dedicating our spring programming to LaTanya Jenkins and Kenya Flash, who were two beautiful souls, two beautiful Black librarians that we lost too soon. And we dedicate our programming to them to honor their legacy and to really be clear that we will never forget them and we will be continuing their work. And so with that said, it's just wonderful that we are able to begin our series with Patty Wong and Tracy Hall talking about activism as leadership. So we have another special guest today that will introduce Patty and Tracy, and I would like to welcome Dr. Betty Turok. And Dr. Betty Turok is family to me. And anyway, I won't lose my composure here, but Betty is the impetus behind the Spectrum Initiative, and that's how I got my LIS education. And so Betty is a longtime educator, longtime advocate, and is one of the driving forces behind the Spectrum Initiative. And so welcome, as I call her, my Mama B, to introduce Patty and Tracy and launch our speaker series for this season. So Dr. Turok, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cook. You and I meet today in the presence of three visionary trailblazers, each changing our profession in different spheres, but all in ways desperately needed. They're giving now our profession focus, inspiration, a guide to fulfilling aspirations, and the tactics to move justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion with its agenda moving forward. Now, when a glimmer of racial reckoning is grasping the attention of our nation, each of them is aware of the importance of keeping current passions alive so that this does not become another aberration in the somewhat bleak history of our country. I admit I am jubilant to have this opportunity to introduce these trailblazers to you. My first introduction is of Patricia Wong, although I have to admit I've never called her Patty in all the days I have known her. I have always called her Patty. When in 2021, Patty was elected president of the American Library Association, headlines in the professional press read, "She is the first Asian American elected to that post." A champion of equity, the hallmark of her membership in ALA is as an activist for 37 years. She began her career as a children's librarian in the Oakland Public Library, the site of a lot of beginnings, developing programs for 6 different branches. She arranged multiple visits for children in libraries in elementary schools and worked to create partnerships between the library, local churches, and community organizations. She took a position as a children's librarian for the Berkeley Public Library, leading to a shift in her role as an administrator. In 2001, Patty was appointed the deputy director of the San Joaquin County Public Library, where she was responsible for the daily operations of a 13-branch system. In 2017, she was named the director of library services for Santa Monica's Public Library. And in 2021, she was moving fast here. She was named the city librarian in Santa Clara, California. Patty was born and raised in San Francisco, has her bachelor's degree in women's studies and her master's degree in library and information studies from the University of California at Berkeley, a seat of activism for many. Patty has served in many different ways in ALA as an at-large member, that means voted on or voted in by all ALA members, and as California's representative to ALA's council, which is the association's largest body of policymakers in ALA. From there, she was elected to the association's executive board, where she served for consecutive periods of time. Patty is a recipient of a whole lot of awards. I think that's probably one of the things people do to get to be elected presidents. What do you think, Patty? At any rate, she has been the Joint Conference of Librarians of Color, their Advocacy Award. She has received CALA, that is the Chinese American Library Association's Distinguished Service Award. She has received the Member of the Year Award from the California Library Association, the Distinguished Service Award, Member of the Year from the Chinese American Library Association. And finally, she has received the prestigious Equality Award from the American Library Association. Patty has served on a myriad of ALA's most powerful committees, like intellectual freedom, budget analysis and review, and legislation. She's an active member of the Association of Library Services to Children and the Young Adult Library Services Association. Finally, I don't know how she has time to do all these things, but Patty is also an educator, a member of the adjunct faculty at the School of Library and Information Science at the I School at San Jose State University, where she's taught subjects such as equitable services, access to library services, library management, services to children and youth, how to write grants to benefit local and regional libraries. And I think that makes you an absolute expert in every form of librarianship, Patty. So let's hear your story.
Thank you, Betty.
Yes.
All right, and then we're going to introduce the wonderful Tracy Hall, the Executive Director of the American Library Association.
This is my job today. I'm introducing all these trailblazing librarians. And the third, really, because I am considering Nicole Cook, part of the three, I introduce you to the third trailblazer. In February 2020, this is a record of firsts I'm introducing here. In 2020, Tracy Hall was appointed the American Library Association's 10th executive director in its 143 years. That's not too bad. 140 years and only 10 executive directors. That says, Tracy, that says you're going to be around a long while. In ALA, she oversees a bunch of stuff, and that keeps her busy. She oversees the largest and oldest library association in the world, comprised of 57,000 members and more than 200 staff members. She's the first female African-American executive director in ALA's history. Wasn't it about time? Upon appointment, ALA's then president, Wanda Brown, observed that Tracy is, and I know these things to all be true, no fake news here, she's optimistic, energizing, and innovative, qualities that will serve her and our association well. And I know she would add with me, devoted to the advancement of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And let me just say at this point that Tracy was the first person whom I heard add the words justice to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And since then, it is all that I say. So maybe we can think of an acronym for it. Our Tracy is no stranger to libraries or to ALA. Over the years, she's worked in a bunch of libraries: the Seattle Public, the New Haven Public, the Queens Library, where she served as vice president for strategy and organizational development. In 1998, she was among the first cohort of Spectrum Scholars, grant programs to diversify librarianship. Later, she served as director of ALA's Office for Diversity, where she wrote the first grant for Spectrum Doctoral Fellows. There's a connection here between many. It was funded by the Institute of Museums and Library Services. Since then, of course, Tracy, who seems to always move up, has been appointed to the advisory group for IMLS. In her spare time, she also has written for the field's major publications. Previously, she worked as deputy commissioner of the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, and as a community investment strategy in global citizenship at the Boeing Company. Our Ms. Hall has also served in multiple roles in the Academy, including as Assistant Dean of Dominican's Graduate School of Library and Information Science in River Forest, and as a visiting professor at Wesleyan Southern Connecticut State and Catholic universities. In addition to her MLS, listen to this, folks. In addition to her MLS from the Information School at the University of Washington, she holds an MA in International Area Studies with an emphasis on Sub-Saharan Africa from Yale University, and dual bachelor's degrees in law and society and Black studies from the University of California, Santa Barbara. She's also studied at the University of Nairobi, and you'll tell me if this is the correct way to say this, please, Dar es Salaam. Oh, great. I love that thumb. In East Africa. A recipient of numerous honors and awards for her library, arts, and civic leadership, Hall was born and raised in Los Angeles and makes her home now in South Chicago. Tracy's life journey has taken her from Watts to Yale to Boeing to ALA as a Spectrum Scholar and now as its executive director. Where will her voice of poetry and passion take our Society for Librarians next? As I was preparing to introduce the amazing Tracy, I read a recap of her words of Truth to Power at ALA's virtual conference this week, and I was compelled to put my words away and let hers ring out as she called for a workforce that reflects the library's diverse client base, universal digital access, and a deeper financial commitment to libraries. She brought light, another word that Tracy likes to use. She brought light to three-pronged platform that she created priorities for library advocates, which include fighting for universal broadband, a commitment from local and federal government, public and private funders to broaden the philanthropy and the infrastructure of libraries, and of course, rapid diversification of library and information services. Underlying all of this call for action, Tracy stressed the guiding principle of justice, which she takes with her everywhere, and I've heard many times before. Let our legacy be justice. I love those words, Tracy. She has reminded us once again that that's the motto for librarians. As I ruminate on what is often said, that people's great regret is that they haven't lived boldly enough, I can reassure you, Tracy Hall will never have any regrets. I give you Tracy Hall.
Thank you so very much. So we decided that we were going to have a conversation today with Patty and Tracy. We call it ALA Connect style. I've had the great pleasure of working very closely with both Tracy and Patty this year, as Patty serves as ALA president. So with that in mind, they have agreed to let me ask them some tough questions. And hopefully we will talk a lot about their activism and how you too can be activists and leaders in the profession and in social justice. So as Dr. Turak mentioned in your introductions, Tracy is the first Black female to lead the American Library Association. Patty is the first AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander president to lead the organization in an elected position. So my first question to you, and Patty, maybe we can start with you, is what took so long and how do we make sure that this is not a once in a lifetime occurrence?
Thank you, Nicole, for that question. And actually, I'm already happy to say that it is not going to be once in a lifetime, because I'm followed by our great Lesa Kananiopua Palaio Lozado, who is incoming ALA president, Native Hawaiian, and so proud that she's part of our leadership too. But I think, to your point, it's taken a long time to actually have someone in leadership at this position, when we have had a number of others, other people of color actually assume that helm before. I will tell you a couple of things, to be very frank and honest with our community here, because I think we have to be, is that there were candidates who actually were named for, to be candidates for ALA president. I'll just say it out loud. Ching-Chi Chen was one of those nominated by the nominating committee to assume that helm. And I believe, and I think it's been very openly shared in that race, that they did not want her to win. So the opposition mounted a third candidate. And as a result of that, it threw, of course, you know, anytime there's a third candidate, it kind of throws the voting into whack a little bit. And so the majority at the time won the election. It was a devastating moment, I think, for a lot of Asian American Pacific Islander leaders in the association, because we thought we finally had, beyond reproach, a candidate who was well known within the profession, who was a leader among many, not just in academia, but in many parts of the association. And still, there was open opposition to her candidacy. So much so that it actually was shared in an open forum. It wasn't not public. It was very public. That was the intention of the third candidate, is to throw the nomination off. So I tell you, that hurt a lot, a little bit, and set us back. And so it made it difficult, I think, for people to come forward, because they felt all for naught. And, you know, let's lick our wounds a little bit. But I think it was especially difficult because it was someone who was so well thought of amongst us as a profession. And it actually, you know, I will say, I think it hurt her ability actually to contribute back to the profession as a whole. I think we sometimes don't realize that it's not just about the position, it's actually about how the process works. And yes, democracy is part of it, but when it's blatant racism, we're not just talking about microaggressions here, we're actually talking about the deliberate thwarting of an election because you don't want someone of color to reach that level. I will tell you, I was the first Asian American to be elected to the executive board of ALA also. And I felt a warm and welcoming environment there. But I will tell you that it's one of the things I just shared with, we have a wonderful opportunity right now. Apala and Kala got awarded an IMLS grant, Pathways to Leadership. And it's, I think, for the first time, a real strong focus on AAPI leadership within the profession. So kudos to them. But I shared with them earlier today that sometimes the path to leadership is one where you feel like you have to be alone. You have to be out there in the front. And I would strongly encourage all of our listeners out there to understand that that's not a satisfactory kind of experience, especially for people of color. We find support and collegiality and that networking and that in the environment so rich when we have one another to call upon and develop that support. So from perhaps maybe a westernized way of thinking, or maybe a different way of thinking, leaders are not meant to walk alone. We are meant to walk with one another. And so we need to share that ability. So it's been a long time. It's almost 344 years since we've had an Asian American, well, I'm the first Asian American president. I'm glad I'm not the last. How we can get through that is actually through grooming our new set of leaders to actually assume different kinds of positions of leadership and not shy away from it. When we talk about being an activist librarian, an activist leader, what does that really mean? It means that we bring other people along with us because we want to make sure that I'm not the first, I'm not the last, right? Les is definitely coming in behind me. I don't think that was just serendipity. I think it was because we are at a place in our association, in our leadership development, in our community, that there's more awareness and opportunities. And we also have a stronger dynamic between all of the national associations of librarians of color, which I'm not sure we had the same kind of relationship even 15 years ago or 10 years ago. I think JCLC has brought a lot of us together. So I guess what I'm saying in a long-winded way, and I apologize for that, is that it takes a set of dynamics, all of us working together. I would say on some levels, I'm looking for succession planning. I really think we need to intentionally groom new leaders from all different corners of the association, but specifically Asian American and Pacific Islanders, because I will say that even in our own association, and especially in our own association, we're not always recognized as the community activists that we are. And sometimes, there's always a predisposition, even among APA members, that we are the quieter group, the quieter leader. We have individuals representing all kinds of different levels and strategies of engaging. And part of my commitment to our Apollo and Callum members out there, and anyone who hasn't joined those associations yet, is actually I want to prepare you to assume leadership so that I'm not the last one. I think with that, I'll stop.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to be brief before I get started, I just want to acknowledge just all of the expertise and all of the activism that is aggregated in this meeting. I'm just reading down the list of people who are here, and I just want to acknowledge you for the work you've done. So many of you, I feel like our work is interconnected. Obviously, one of my main mentors, because there are some questions, the person who recruited me into librarianship, even though I was working in a library, and I'm going to talk about that, is Sasha Orange. And so I would not be here at all if it weren't for Sasha. So I just want to say that sometimes when it comes to communities of color, we can actually, and John Agada has done so much research about this in terms of information gatekeepers. Sometimes it is an individual who throws us a lifeline. And I want to acknowledge Sasha always and forever, because I know that whatever I have done in libraries as a librarian, it is because she really literally sought me out because she had heard of some of the work I was doing at Seattle Public Library. That said, I want to be as honest, if I can keep it real, as Patty, I think that's that California coming out. Tupac would call that California love, right? We love with honesty, we love with truth. And the love that I want to share is that it is not lost on me. And I know that my being named to this role was only possible because of probably one of the most ethnically and racially diverse executive boards that ALA has ever seen, because I am both of those known quantities. I am, of course, a Black librarian who's been committed to the work of justice, as Dr. Tirak has spoken to since the inception of my librarianship, but I have not let any position that I have ever attained temper that at all. There is no party line for me. The only party line is justice. And I'm going to tell you a funny story. I'm not going to name the institution, but when I had gotten like a pretty big promotion, I was talking to my big brother, who is 7 years older than me, real quiet, almost, if you've ever seen like some of the roles that I would say Forrest Whitaker plays, in which he's like really, really quiet, but all seeing, that's my brother. And I was talking to my brother about the fact that there was some decision-making about to happen, and that I really didn't think that it was equitable. And it was actually being made without any representation from the constituency that would be impacted. And I pointed out that, many cases, the people who were around the table were rubber stamping, including me, would be rubber stamping. And that there was an expectation that you wouldn't say anything at all, and that to say something, your roles would be jeopardized, at the table. So I was talking to him about that and just deliberating. And we got off the phone and he called me back and he said, I said, the question is, am I going to rock the boat? So my brother, we got off the phone and he calls me back with like a minute. And he just says 2 words, capsize it. And so it's in the blood. I mean, it's in the blood. And let's talk about LaTanya real quick. So what I want to talk about really quick, because, ancestral memory is so much a part of how we act and how we operate. My family's from Louisiana, so, that's how I operate, with remembrance and reverence and all of this. But I remember when I was working at Boeing, I had gone to, I don't watch TV. So that's like my escape. You know how people escape into TV? I escape by not watching TV, because TV in a lot of cases is not a criticism, but it sort of reifies a status quo. And I want to be able to be an original thinker. And I'm not saying I don't read, because obviously I'm a library, I read a lot, but there's something about the way that TV operates that for me, when I kind of began to understand it as a child, I was thinking, okay, this is one thing I'll let go. And so I was traveling for work, and I was at the airport, and at the gate, there was a news, and that's when I saw Darian Albert in Chicago, a young man at Finger High School. I saw him being, he was beaten to death, and the clips were over and over and over, and they were saying this might be disturbing for some, so we want, to, for our sensitive viewers, and I'm like, everybody should be sensitive, like, are they saying for our desensitized viewers, you don't have to step away, but for those of you who are still sensitive, I thought that's interesting and compelling. But anyway, I was right there at the gate. So even if I turned my eyes away, I could still hear. And I remember thinking, violence is so normalized in my adopted city of Chicago. And I came to Chicago to work for ALA. I was like, we gotta wake people up. And I want to interrupt this, and I'm going to see which way I can do this. So when I got back into town, that night I went and bought like all of these poster roll and all this stuff, and I made like all of these signs, just like talking about violence and how violence against Black people. This is years before we were talking about trauma. This is like 2009, and how it was, and how Black life and how Black death, as Vincent Harding says, that death is not the point of history, right? In terms of when we think about liberation theology. So I was like, why would we show this again and again? So I said, I'm going to march. And I tried to get all my different friends in Chicago. I didn't have as many as I have today. And like, people were like, yeah, I could, but I'm going to this, or I already planned brunch, or can we do it next week after? And I'm like, activism can't wait. So I said, I'm gonna march. I'm just gonna have a solo march down Michigan Avenue. Now, if you know Chicago, and right now ALA is now headquartered on Michigan at 225 North Michigan. So I said, I'm gonna walk down the middle of Michigan Avenue. Now, this is, when you said, Nicole, when you said activism, this is what I'm talking about. This is how I interpret it. So I had my signs, and it wasn't just a solo one-woman march down the middle of the street. And, then it didn't take too long for the police to start zooming in on this. So people started watching and all of this. And then the police, 1 car, 2 cars, 3 cars, 4 cars, 5 cars. And by this time, all I had was my cell phone. And I was new. I joined, I think, Facebook or something like that in 2009 itself too, because I was escaping that. And I just said, hey, I to anybody who might be on here right now, I am marching down the street of Washington, and I just need to get a signal, because if I get arrested, I just need to have somebody that I can call. And LaTanya Jenkins wrote, "We got you, girl." And with LaTanya in my back pocket, I walked down the street. I didn't get arrested. And many people, especially young people, especially young Black people, joined me. And I took it to the sidewalk because I didn't want them getting arrested. And we were able to have this protest that actually grew a lot of people. I'm gonna stop there, because when I'm talking about activism, I'm not talking about convenient activism. I'm not talking about committee activism. I'm talking about actually confronting some of the issues that Patty talked about, and some of the persistent and prevalent issues that would make my being in this role an aberration as opposed to a standard for the association. In 2022, it has to stop. And we're joined here together, I think, is because we're joined here because we understand that the only resonant type of organization that can last and be durable is one that is equitable and built on justice, because all of the others must and will be toppled.
Absolutely. Thank you. Just to follow up on that, and interested to hear, Tracy and Patty, your thoughts on this. One of the things that we talk a lot about in the classroom, right, and that's kind of where I see my activism, is that, there's no one right way to do this work, right? And, and that small actions matter, and, small actions culminate to the greater good. So I'm wondering if you could talk to our audience, because there are several of my students here as well. What are other ways, right? Everyone's not going to march down Michigan Avenue, but what are other ways that people can find ways to really join the collective that Tracy and Patty are describing? Because, you both had different trajectories, but as Tracy mentioned, what is that common thread? So what are some other ways that students can get involved? And anyone, actually, not just our students.
Patty, do you want to go first?
You can, Tracy, and then I'll follow up. It's fine.
Okay, well, this is going to seem kind of like a little bit different to say, which is why I wanted to say it. I think be really, really good at something. Like, figure out what you want to master and master it. Because I would say, the experience that I have had in my career is that it isn't just that I'm an activist, and I'm not trying to blow my own horn or anything like that. I'm just trying to be as honest as I can be. It's because there are some things in this field that I really know. And also, in whether it's, also too, because I spent a lot of my time too in cultural administration, arts administration, I would say that there are some things in some of the fields that I've worked in that I've really mastered. I mean, I'm still learning, I'm always learning, always growing. And there's a lot I don't know, but there have been some things that I have like really gone to the woodshed, and I have spent some time late at night, early in the morning, reading everything, compiling everything, going to sit at the feet of others who had some mastery. I mentioned, I was reading, there was a time when, and I've studied individuals, like there's a time that I just was reading everything that Dr. Josie had written, because in addition to him being an activism, he was a prolific activist, he was a prolific writer, and obviously a prolific scholar. So there was some times that I was getting sort of like my, one of my degrees in Dr. Josie, so much so that I could quote to him some of his writings. And I remember him talking about a couple of things, like we're not going to be able to crack the nut on recruitment and retention in our library schools unless we have more Dr. Cooks. I'll be honest, right? That's what he was saying. And I decided that I wanted to know more. I had seen him speak a lot of different times, and I asked someone who was his contemporary where I could find him, because it would be like you would see him, but I didn't know where he lived. And I found out he was living like in an assisted learning center and a living center. And I just started calling him all the time, and we started calling each other all the time. And so what I'm trying to say is that by the time it was time to write this grant, there was no way that, IMLS could have said no, but people couldn't have said no forever, because all of the research was there. All of the research was there. So I would say, to be an activist, okay, we can use Audre Lorde, we can use Grace Lee Boggs. These people are scholars, King, oh my goodness, right? Scholarship. I would say be so knowledgeable in your understanding of a topic, and be so facile at its practice that those who would deny your activism cannot deny your mastery. And I would say that would be something I just, and that's why even now today, there are some areas that I am trying to study, like I'm trying to get a whole degree. So I'm going to turn that over to you, Patty, see what you have to say.
Thanks, Tracy. Tracy and I are thought partners in so many ways. And so I wanted to kind of piggyback a little bit on what she said. She said, you know, as librarians, we have superpowers already. So I think you need to invest in that superpower, wherever that happens to be. I'll just give you an example. Sanford Berman, longtime cataloger, activist. What he did for the country and for the world is to take a look at all of our subject headings and to think about it from an equity, diversity, and inclusive way, and to make suggestions for change. He did that in his own way, initially with his own money, and then other people started to actually subscribe to his newsletter because they were interested in making change. So when we had the Library of Congress subject heading change just now on illegal aliens, and that was a really long time in coming. Our catalogers in your institutions, in our institutions, did the activist way of thinking about it and changed it immediately, because we know the fight is not over. But the likelihood of it coming back to illegal aliens is nil, because we have made a difference. The change needs to be immediate and impactful and with passion. But I definitely agree with Tracy. Find what you love, find what you're good at, use that superpower, especially on the librarian end, to influence and make the change, whether it's locally, whether it's in your church, whether it's at school, where you volunteer. All of those things can and should make a difference. You know, I'm reminded about the people that actually have been influential in my life. Dr. Josie, especially, Arnulfo Trejo, Charlotte Kim, Betty, right here, Elizabeth Martinez, you know, Benny Tate Wilkin, Gordon Conable, and Charlotte, you know, Clara Chu. You know, there are some people among us right now. So the other thing is actually for students also is if you want to get active, find who inspires you. Think about, as Tracy has done, you know, she took a look at all of Dr. E.J. Josie's life and work, and ways in which you can get inspired and empowered, and to use all of that. As librarians, research is probably one of the things that we do best. If you can research something, not only to benefit yourself, but benefit our community as a whole, think about that. One of the things that I do at San Jose State is when I teach the grant writing class, we don't work on a case study. I actually ask my students to go out into the community and find a nonprofit, a library, a school that could benefit from that work, because that is a source of activism right there, that we use our talents to benefit the community and make the world a better place.
Yeah, no doubt. And just, you know, to add to what our wonderful speakers have said, what I hear Tracy and Patty saying in some of their talking to us is about extending legacies, right? So Tracy extended Dr. Josie's legacy. Lots of people are extending Sandy Berman's legacy, right, to get to where we are now. I'm really excited that I can build on Tracy and Dr. Josie's legacy with Spectrum work, and Dr. Betty as well, with the new round of Spectrum doctoral fellows. So, you know, as Patty mentioned, you know, activism is ongoing, and it's how are we, you know, finding our superpower, and also how are we extending the legacies that have already been set forth for us. So, you know, I could ask these two ladies questions all day, but in the interest of time, we're going to go into our last question, because they did talk about some of the people who have influenced them. They talked about how they look at what activism is, right? So with the last question, and we'll go back to Patty first, what would you describe as one of your biggest achievements as a librarian slash activist? And what is perhaps one of your biggest missed opportunities in that realm? Patty, you're mute.
Thank you. One of the things I think I'm most proud of is the systems change that we are doing in the state of California around thinking about equity, diversity, inclusion as everyone's responsibility. public, academic, school, every library, and to engage the state library leadership to commit funding and resources, not only for training, but actually engagement with our community to make it part of our LSTA 5-year goals, to think about how we need to lead conversations and community engagement to make the community stronger. And I've spent really the balance of my career doing different things in the state library to try to get to this point. Lots of writing, lots of training, lots of engagement. And it's only been, I mean, this has been a lifelong journey of 30+ years. And it's only taken now in this moment to create some sustainability so that we all understand that it's all our responsibility. To go from performative to transformational, because that, to go from the statements and the equity action plans, but really, what are we talking about when we want sustainable implementation? And to think about this not just as an opportunity, this is a mandate for our communities to remind ourselves that education is not neutral, that we need to be available and encourage our community to grow through information that we share with them, through dialogue that we create in a safe space so people can have those that dialogue and that discussion, and to influence change that is sustainable. In terms of what I regret, or maybe a lost opportunity, maybe, I think one of the things I probably will think about, when you're ALA president, you have about this much time to make this much influence. And I think one of the things that I'm hoping that I will continue the work. I may not have the same kind of support that I have now. And so it's not a lost opportunity. It's actually thinking about the fact that we all have high aspirations for change in our communities. And I too had that. I think what I need to understand more of is that the systems change takes time. And we're moving a big ship. And Tracie is a wonderful partner in terms of making this happen. So I am leaning into the moment, realizing that some of those things that we had planned, Nicole, are going to have their impact. Maybe not today, but actually maybe further down the road. And I need to be a little bit more patient, maybe with myself, but also understanding that even though the work can't be done in this finite amount of time, that there's room for growth and that everyone needs to be engaged in that process. So. Tracie?
Yes. Okay, so let's see. What I would say, let me start with what I think are some of the, I don't know, if I had some do-overs, I would say one thing is that when I left ALA to be assistant dean over at Dominican was on conditional and it needed a lot of love and attention. And I was in the midst of doing my own PhD program. And I remember thinking, short-sighted, one of my advisors said to me, if you would really, if you didn't have this type of job, you could really be contributing to the literature in the area that I was interested in. And I remember that at the time they said that on a pile on their desk was one of the larger publications or journals in the field. And I had co-written an article that was the main topic for the thing, and it was listed on the cover. And I remember thinking, oh, this person is so out of touch that they don't even know that. And I said, I'm a practitioner. I'm not going to get a PhD because, And I really made this false distinction between being a practitioner and a scholar. And that was really that was my naivete and my own limited education, because look at what we're talking about and look at who we're talking to and among. So I would say that, you know, and I have to be really honest, some of that was my pride, and I was looking for an escape. It was really hard to keep my studies up and to do the work that I was called to do. And I let myself find an easy out by just stepping away from the program. And if I could, and it didn't turn out in any bad way. I mean, there's nothing I've wanted that I haven't been able to, you know, at least see, you know, in my life. I'm not talking about positions, but things I've wanted to actually accomplish. But the thing that I do know is that we have so few scholars of color. And if I could have contributed to that even symbolically, I wish that I had, I don't know, better thinking and even better guidance at that time. So that's one thing that I think about in terms of, like, you know, I hope the biggest thing I'm going to contribute to is still coming, whatever that is. I mean, some things that I think about is that when I came to ALA, you know, it was this idea that the Spectrum program would be an initiative and that it would end. And I fought, you know, and Betty knows this because she stood right there, not only, you know, obviously when we talk about the origin story, but also too, Spectrum becoming dyed in the wool of ALA. And I think we cemented that, you know, with, you know, I was able to write ALA's first and second IMLS grant that had ever been awarded to the institution, period. And the second one was for the PhD program. And then I think before I left there, you know, we were shy in the association about asking people to identify our membership by race and ethnicity. And I went around that by working on an idea and getting it teed up and delivering on it, what we call diversity counts, which is now, you know, something that everybody thinks about. But before I fought to make that a reality, and I had to write and do the analysis and all that kind of stuff, you know, as well, and really contribute to the actual writing of it. So those are some things that I could think about. Yeah.
Absolutely. And to these wonderful responses, I want to just make mention that Tracy has written some wonderful chapters, and there is a piece that appeared in American Libraries, Race and Place, that I assign every year. So she has contributed to the writing. And Patty is planting so many seeds as ALA president. So, you know, keep on the lookout for that as well. So we have our first question from our audience, and this is from Joseph Winberry. And Joseph is actually a PhD student at the University of Tennessee. And Joseph wants to know, I am curious if you have any thoughts on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion as it relates to older people in LIS. They seem to be a group that is often left out of the conversation, though there are intersections across all of the populations that LIS organizations serve. Tracy, if you want to take that first.
Wow. Joseph, first of all, I was just talking earlier this morning. Today is like my talk day, I guess. And I was just talking about to medical librarians, to people who are interested in the cross sections of medical librarianship in the African American community, Black community. And I was talking about, you know, these about who's not online, who doesn't participate online. And I was also talking about adult literacy as one of the big issues that impedes people being online. But when it comes to healthcare, one big impediment is the ways in which, especially BIPOC folks, are treated in a medical establishment, and how they're not taken seriously and things. So one thing we talked about is not just generational poverty, but also to just systemic poor healthcare access. And I think for all of the reasons that I just described and others, we don't talk a lot about the information needs of older people. And I think that we should be talking about it as a matter of literally in terms of lifespan, in the same way that we've seen this pandemic impact the overall lifespan of, say, Black people is lowered. I mean, it is in 2 years, it has noticeably lowered the lifespan of an entire race. in this country, we also need to be thinking about the information needs, and also to the information redlining of older people. So I'm going to stop there, but you're right on, and I think that there's a lot that should be done, written, and grants, I think, to really get at the issue that you're discussing. Yep.
Joseph, that's a really great observation, and you are absolutely right. We need to spend more time talking about that. I was speaking to, I know Tracy and I were doing a lot of speaking this morning. I was speaking to a small group of directors about what does EDI look like from their consortial view. And they were focused extremely on, I would say, middle income users. And I challenged them to think about, oh, sorry, we're closing right now. Sorry about that. So I challenged the group to think about anyone who is geographically isolated or isolated digitally or isolated in ways that we haven't even begun to uncover. Do they know the makeup of their community, the average age of that community, where their community and how their community seeks information, how they use their information? What information do they consider reliable? Where are they getting that information? We have, writer, songwriter, activists in the community now who are taking their songs off Spotify because of the misinformation that's being perpetuated on Spotify, but for really known people in the community. I will say to you that it's also from the AAPI perspective. Recently, I was talking to the Surgeon General about misinformation around the pandemic. And, and he didn't realize it. I mean, he knows that certainly our Asian American Pacific Islander community is like the African American community is adversely affected by COVID. What he didn't realize, though, is how much our Asian American older adults were listening to their local media because of the language need. And they were getting misinformation all over the place. So I think one of the things that we do have to work on is not only elevating service to our older adult communities and those that are definitely geographically isolated, but we also have to make sure that our older LIS professionals actually feel like they're part of the leadership that needs to happen. So I think I took your question in two ways. One is how we can engage, because I think some people think activism is only for young people, when we know that it isn't. It's all of our responsibilities. I am 60 years old, folks, and I have no problem telling you that. I've been an activist for a long time, but I can also see how some of my colleagues who are about my same age, about to retire, they're saying, activist, me? And I've talked to them about how to feel comfortable in who they are, in using their superpowers of librarian to bring the best information possible so communities can make good choices, and also we can elevate the work. But thank you. And retirees too, absolutely, Janice.
Yeah, and I just want to make mention, Joseph brought up such a great point about one of our perhaps underserved populations, and just want the audience to know, how much of a stand in terms of activism Tracy and Patty are currently taking in terms of services to the incarcerated, right? We're also talking about, another underrepresented population, and also perhaps an underserved population in terms of librarianship. So again, so many different, populations for us to be thinking about. Yes, and Diana reminds the need for reentry programs. Absolutely, there's just so much to do, right? We are almost at time, so I don't want to take up any more of folks' time, but just want to really sincerely thank Tracy and Patty and Dr. Betty for coming today and getting us started with our spring series. And I think that this is the perfect way for us to get started in talking about the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion in library social justice as well. And with their conversation, I hope that we can keep the things that they said in mind in terms of activism as we proceed this spring talking to some of the members of the National Association of Librarians of Color. So we'll be having 5 groups come in over the course of the spring semester and talking about just the amazing work that their organizations have done, and really, you know, part of the backbone of the profession that I don't think enough people know about. So please look forward to that. But please join me in thanking Tracy and Patty again, and thank you for letting me ask you those tough questions. Thank you all for coming today to our first Baker Diversity Lecture of Spring 2022. It has been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Betty, and thank you, Nicole, for the honor.
Thank you both. And Patty, it's always good to be together with you. Thank you for being such an extraordinary ALA president. Thank you, everyone, for being in the circle. It's very fortifying.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you again. Thanks, Tracy, for being that great partner.